Welcome to the Assembling Inclusion podcast. On this show, we feature different programs, individuals, and initiatives focused on being more inclusive of individual needs. We invite you to learn right alongside us. If you want some additional resources or access to our courses, please visit our website or follow us on social media. But for right now, let's get right to the episode. Coming up next on the Assembling Inclusion podcast.
So we're starting to develop this sense of, okay, we can teach you a skill in a quiet environment. Now, can you do it again where there's more distractions, there's more things that might knock you off your game? And so one of the really powerful aspects of virtual reality is that once we have a base lesson, we can layer in the types of things that might make the real world difficult and level up the learner to eventually succeed.
Today on our show, we're talking to Vijay Ravindran about his company, Floreo. Floreo is the first behavioral therapy metaverse, and it has the mission of creating a safe virtual world for learners while helping them gain skills to use in their daily lives. According to their website, the platform is used by individuals with autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, anxiety, and a variety of other neurodiverse conditions. We got to learn more about the virtual reality platform itself and how it's structured, as well as the types of lessons and content that are available, and my personal favorite, the research behind how the platform is used. As someone who is deeply invested in educational technology and inclusion, this interview gave me a lot of new information to consider about the benefits of using VR to gain skills. So let's dive right in. Welcome to the Assembly and Inclusion podcast. I'm here today with Vijay Ravindran. He's the founder and CEO of Floreo. So welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you join us today.
Thanks for having me.
So just to start off, can you explain to our listeners what the Floreo platform is?
The Floreo system is virtual reality content designed with objectives around social skill acquisition, aimed for a neurodiverse population, using virtual reality headsets to create an immersive experience, and then paired with a coaching console that enables a parent, special education teacher, therapist, or friend to chaperone and provide assistance to help in the goals of the lessons.
Can you tell me what inspired you to start building this platform? I know everybody has kind of their own inspiration that gets them started.
For me, the mission of Floreo is very personal. My son is on the autism spectrum and was diagnosed in early childhood, has been through many hours of therapy. And the idea for Floreo came from him when he was 6 years old, seeing me trying out a new virtual reality headset about 6 years ago and wanting to try it out. And after spending about a half hour in virtual reality, he started pretend playing with his toys based on what he had actually seen in VR. It was the first time he had played in that manner, and it ended up being a light bulb moment that inspired me to start exploring this idea that virtual reality could be a new medium for learning skills.
That's really interesting. I love the fact that it has that personal connection to your son and your own personal life. And then I can see how that must have been a really beautiful light bulb moment to see that connection. Before I dive into any of the content of the actual platform, which is always my favorite part, I was a teacher, so I always love talking about the content that's on it and how it impacts the students and the learners. But before we get into all that, can you describe a little bit of like the technical equipment involved, just so everybody knows? You said a headset and a coaching console too.
So Floreo today is a system that requires really three pieces of equipment. It's built using virtual reality technology. And for someone to use Floreo, they need an iPhone 7 or above. That inside of a plastic Google Cardboard headset enables a virtual reality experience. There's hundreds of Google Cardboard style virtual reality headset holders available through retail sites like Amazon. The ones we use cost about $20. And so these hold the phone, and then the phone essentially goes into a display mode that creates a left and right view for your eyes to create the immersive virtual reality experience. The last piece of equipment that's needed is an iPad. We work with iPad Airs or above, so 2015 iPads or later. And that is what the supervising adult uses to play the coaching role while the learner is in virtual reality. We do have an Oculus Quest, now called Meta Quest, given Facebook's name changes, a version coming out this summer. So we're in an external beta right now with some of our existing customers. And that would be an alternative to using the iPhone and headset holder.
Oh, that'll be exciting. I'm just thinking from an engagement perspective, I've seen how students have gotten excited over the prospect of using that type of headset. I mean, in addition to the regular headset in general, I mean, any opportunity to put that on is just a nice experience, but that'll be interesting to see how that beta test goes.
Absolutely. The Oculus Quest is the leading consumer virtual reality headset on the market. It has really strong graphics, yet is still a mobile headset and doesn't require a high-end personal computer. So it's definitely a more sophisticated experience than using a smartphone and a headset holder. But the company has also really believed in affordability and accessibility. So we're able to source for our customers refurbished iPhones, and we're able to, in cases where services need to be delivered where there's not broadband necessarily, customers can use mobile data plans to use our system without having Wi-Fi in the home.
That's really nice, because I was going to say, I know that could be tricky depending on what location you're in. So that's great that you have a lot of different options. And I also like that you said you can really put it in any headset, right? So even if you don't have the ones that, you know, your company provides, you can opt into any other headset and still have it work, which is really accessible. So in terms of instructional content, I was looking at the website a little bit. So there seems to be a lot of different lessons, which is fantastic. I think I saw crossing the street, interacting with law enforcement. What was the process for deciding what lessons to actually create?
It's been a really fun experience to work with all the different stakeholders in helping the neurodiverse in creating the content. You know, we started Floreo 6 years ago, and the first set of lessons that we created in virtual reality took place in a safari park, and we're focused on this area of development called joint attention. That is an important pillar of communication skills developing. During that period when we were building that first lesson, a horrible incident happened in Florida where an adult therapist was working with an adult on the spectrum who had wandered from his group home. Someone called the police. The therapist ended up being shot by the police, and the autistic adult was traumatized by the whole experience. And as we were starting to show Floreo to families, many families were asking, you know, I'm really worried about law enforcement encounters. So we started developing some concepts that ended up leading to a partnership with Children's Hospital Philadelphia, which then led to a 4-year NIH grant, and we've built out those lessons. With the 2 sets of lessons developed, we started working with pilot partner schools and clinics. Once people understand what virtual reality can provide, their mind and their creativity really flows from there on the different ways that they can help the students or clients that they're working with. And so we have now nearly 200 lessons in the Floreo catalog, and it spans a wide range of building block skills for early development to social skills in the school, to safety lessons like crossing the street, to independent living areas like shopping in a grocery store, to now some workforce training that we're doing with the state of Tennessee. Then we last year also released new skill areas around executive function, so how to plan, organize, be flexible, how to have impulse control, as well as emotional regulation, how we can help calm both mind and body through the use of virtual reality. Honestly, the main kind of guiding pedagogy is the requests of the customers. They are looking at where they want to help specific kids and now young adults, and they're asking for things all over the place because there's such a wide range of areas where people need potential help. And so we work with our customers to prioritize those areas that could be most beneficial, and then we try to release new content on an ongoing basis.
I like that you're saying that the participants are really driving the content. When I was looking over some of the lessons that you had available on the website, which I'm going to link to for everybody in the show notes, they could take a look as well. I had done some reading about autism and VR. That was my area of study as a grad student. So special education specifically in technology. And I remember reading about life skills and things like that through VR, but it was really those more safety-based lessons that I was really drawn to when I was looking at your content. I really liked the crossing the street and things like that, things that are difficult to practice in everyday life. That was really something that I could see being very beneficial, that you could kind of repeat over and over again inside of this space.
There's 3 reasons that really stand out when people think about using VR to teach different types of social skills and safety skills. The first is, as you said, the fact that you can immerse the individual in aspects of the life lesson that are impossible to replicate in a classroom or in a therapist office or even in the home, and where it can be repeatable without the negative consequences of getting it wrong. Like, that's really important. The second area is that so much of skill teaching ends up being adult to child in this area. And often what we're really trying to help the children develop is the ability to play with other children or make friends with other children. And so in virtual reality, you can create avatars of other children and practice a lot of the social dynamics there. And then the third area is that the animated environment can be often a simpler and easier to approach environment in the real world. And so one of the things we hear a lot of is just how it's fun for the kids. They're more engaged. They're able to actually focus on learning the skill because there's less noise and it's more like playing a game for them.
I could see that. You kind of block everything out and you just get to focus on the one task at hand as you're learning it. And I could see how that would be impactful. Have you found, is there a particular lesson or group of lessons that you found to be the most beneficial when working with students so far? I'm sure, I mean, you have a wide variety of lessons, so I'm sure all of them will obviously have their own advantages, but is there one that really stands out to you?
From a research standpoint, the joint attention lessons and the police interaction lessons have had the most attention on them for research efficacy. And in particular, the police encounter lessons have a successful randomized controlled trial and academic presentations around that. The most popular lesson is the lessons on teaching pragmatic communication and kind of peer-to-peer conversation skills. And so we have, for instance, a lesson where the learner is at the lunch table in a cafeteria and there's 3 other kids, and the 3 other kids are talking about a subject. And each time you play the lesson, it's randomized. So there's about 20 different subjects they could be talking about. So it ranges from flavors of ice cream to what their brothers and sisters like to trips they've taken. And the learner has to listen, understand what they're talking about, and offer up a way to join the conversation and participate. Those lessons have been very popular, and they create that notion of a repeatable practice environment that also allows for that peer-to-peer skill where it's kids talking to each other. We also have added a new one recently where it's the same lesson, except there's quite a bit more walking traffic and noise of just the cafeteria. And so we're starting to develop this sense of, okay, we can teach you a skill in a quiet environment. Now, can you do it again where there's more distractions, there's more things that might knock you off your game? And so one of the really powerful aspects of virtual reality is that once we have a base lesson, we can layer in the types of things that might make the real world difficult and level up the learner to eventually succeed.
You're almost scaffolding it. Like once they've accomplished it in isolation with a quiet environment, now let's add on the additional elements. That would be great for a therapy or a classroom environment to be able to help continue to push students toward the next level. Let's talk about the coaches for a second, because as you're talking about the content, so what is the coach doing or the facilitator or the teacher while the student is in this immersive experience?
The coach has a role that can vary based on the lesson design. So some lessons, the coach is merely an observer, maybe providing some cheerleading, but aside from that, can simply watch the learner go through the lesson, and the lesson essentially is able to interact with the learner in a manner that doesn't require any other input. Many of our lessons require some level of input that is usually a combination of assessing whether the learner has been able to demonstrate the skill, or needs a reprompting or some sort of assistance in accomplishing the skill, which we then also in a natural manner use for data collection purposes. Sometimes that data that we're collecting also then tailors the lesson further to help the learner, and as well as to be available as data that can be looked at afterwards. And then besides that, because the coach is present and observing the learner, that we know that every child is unique, and the types of advice and the ways that that child might learn the lesson is going to be unique. And so the coach is able to essentially interact in real time and provide that coaching or provide that unique encouragement that motivates them to keep going. And then to also make the important decision of when to leave VR and transition to some other aspect of the session, or if it's time to simply re-enter the classroom, and to update what that lesson plan might be that for the next time they're in VR.
I like the personalized. I think that's an important part of the therapy, or just your IEP goals in general, if that's what you're working on. So that's nice that the coach can really go through and tailor the lessons to make it more personalized. I noticed there was on your website, I think under the resources section, there was like a visual schedule that coaches could follow. So is that a structure that you recommend for them? I think there was something like, there was like a couple minutes in the VR, then a break.
Usually introduce that schedule when we are onboarding a new user and helping them with first introductions to virtual reality. We all know that for the neurodiverse, often there are sensory sensitivities, and that it's important to allow someone to acclimate to an environment that could be quite a bit different than what they're used to. And so we have been building out resources to help the school districts and the therapy clinics and the parents who are using the system to just, here's how to introduce Floreo in a gentle way. Here's how to get them ready for VR. And then once they're in it, again, every child is unique. The adults working with them will have a sense of, is this someone that can spend 5 minutes in VR or 45 minutes? That might take some working up to, and it's an individual decision. The lessons themselves are designed to be fairly bite-sized, more like that 5-minute variety or less. And that helps facilitate a lot of different ways to incorporate Floreo. So for some people, it might be one lesson here, one lesson there, maybe use it as a reward. In other cases, it might be a bulk of a 45-minute session.
That's really flexible for the classroom then too, because I'm thinking if you have a couple of students who are using it, you can do 5 minutes here with one, 5 minutes there with another, and then you're not sacrificing the quality of the lesson if they're meant to be that bite-sized anyway.
That's right. And in particular, I'm glad you mentioned the classroom. In the classroom, one of the biggest challenges for any of the customers we talk to today in the classroom setting is that the amount of one-on-one time between an adult, teacher, or aide and the student is limited and precious. And so we do see early on, teachers immediately began innovating. Once you hand them something, they're very creative and think about how to scale things that they think can be helpful. And so in this case, teachers started using smart boards and Apple AirPlay and projecting the coaching view to the screen so that they could, if they're working in a closed classroom with, say, 6 students, they could do turn taking across the students. The other 5 could be watching the smart board, providing encouragement. That also then helps with the kids that are more nervous or sensory sensitive, could be doing it later. We have found in the research that if a child sees another child modeling the use of VR, they become more comfortable trying it out. Those techniques have been really helpful. I think looking forward to some of the exciting things that we're starting to think about building next. One of the areas that I think would be very powerful is allowing multiple kids to enter the VR environment simultaneously and give them some abilities to interact with each other. It's an area that's not coming tomorrow or next week, but it's an area that we're starting to think about because it can make this type of system even more useful in the special education context.
Yeah, you could have those chances then for students to really get that person to person, especially if you're working on those communication-based skills anyway, to have another person in there with you aside from, in addition to the avatar characters and things like that. That would be great. So you mentioned the research a few times. You have a lot of research on your website, which I'm a huge fan of. I love anytime I can pop into a study and see how someone used it and what the results were. That's always something that's huge for me personally. I know for a lot of other educators as well. So of all the studies that you've conducted with this technology, what stands out as being the most impactful or the most important results that you've found so far?
Well, I think in some ways, the most important is that a very, very high percentage of children with an autism diagnosis enjoy using VR, even if they're having sensory sensitivities, can become acclimated to VR and use it as part of their experience on an ongoing regular basis. That has thematically stood out across all the studies, is that we haven't had, I think a lot of people, including myself when I started the company, had a real concern that will children in high numbers or high percentages want to wear this headset that goes completely over your face and occludes your vision? And the answer is luckily yes, that in general, they seem to really enjoy the VR experience. It's animated screen time that has a purpose, but it is something that they gravitate towards. I think if there's any one thing or one study, a randomized control trial with Children's Hospital Philadelphia, where we taught law enforcement interactions, and then the study design was so novel in that we had the participation of the Philadelphia Police Department, who interviewed both the control and the treatment group. The control group received the leading educational curriculum on law enforcement encounters aimed at the neurodiverse, and the treatment group received Floreo. It was minutes to minutes, 3 45-minute sessions, interview with the Philadelphia police officer 4 weeks later. The results showed that Floreo had a greater effect of about 2x based on the scoring that the researchers at Children's Hospital used. And then additionally, that in other measurements around calm behavior and body language, which again, in a law enforcement encounter, fidgeting and sudden movements can be potentially interpreted in really negative ways with the police, just the way it is. And so, the Floreo cohort actually scored 5 times better on that factor. And so there's some really strong indications that if incorporated into ongoing skill teaching, that the effect of virtual reality can be pronounced, that it can lead to stronger generalization of skills, can be more efficient with the time of the kids, which is precious, of course. So we're really encouraged by that.
Those are all really great results. I had started skimming through the research initially before this, and that really stood out to me was how positive it seemed to be in favor of using the VR platform, which is something I'm sure educators are going to appreciate, especially with the transferring of the skills and the time. I think those are the big ones. And the fact that students seem to be enjoying it. That's always the fear, like you had mentioned, that maybe this isn't going to be something that they're going to like. But I appreciate the fact that the research is overwhelmingly suggesting that students really do appreciate this type of learning and instruction.
We have a number of studies planned for the next 2 years, and we continue to recruit and start work with new research partners. So we have ongoing studies with the University of Virginia. We have a plan to launch a new study with West Virginia University. And we also are working with some industry partners. We're part of a pediatric accelerator called the KidsX program, which is sponsored by a number of children's hospitals. So we're hoping to announce some of those partnerships soon this summer. And so research is always going to continue to be a focus, and there's quite a bit more to do.
That's excellent to hear. I love that it's just continuing on, because it's never really done. It's always good to continue to see what else could be done, how are things going, and how to improve. So I think that's excellent that the research is continuing. And my last question really is just, how do you think Floreo is contributing to making society more inclusive overall?
Well, I think that's a great question, and it's core to our mission. So the mission at Floreo is to make the world more open and accessible for the neurodiverse. We have the tagline of the first behavioral therapy metaverse, but we have a very specific meaning for what we're seeking to build: a virtual world that allows the neurodiverse to practice and gain new skills that translate to success in the real world. Our goals are to help anyone who is able to use the metaverse to gain new skills that lead to eventually happiness in life and friends, gainful employment, the ability to live independently and succeed. And we think that over time, this growing library of lessons are going to contribute to allowing everyone to acquire those skills, and that they'll be able to do it hopefully in ways that are more convenient for them and their families, such as in their home through capabilities like telehealth and distance learning, that they'll be able to be more efficient in the amount of time that they are learning the skills, which allows them to then pursue other interests. I think some of the biggest challenges for kids who have a diagnosis is that they're not allowed to be kids to the same degree and play and have exposure to so many other opportunities. So the hope is that the virtual reality platform can also allow them to have time to do other things, and because they're able to get those fundamental skills. And then hopefully in parallel to that, society as a whole also becomes more adaptive to the needs of the neurodiverse. And so I think we all want that to happen. And in the meantime, we have to do what we can to help the neurodiverse with ways to be able to fit into the world that's there.
I definitely agree. That's the end goal, is that we want society to be more inclusive and accepting. But I really see how the company seems to be pushing for ways to help make things a little bit more accessible and work toward that inclusive goal. Floreo seems to be doing a lot of really amazing things. And I'm going to make sure I link to the website, the different articles you referenced in our show notes, so that everyone could take a look at those as well. And I want to thank you so much for being here with us today. There was so much great information. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Assembling Inclusion podcast. I hope the information in this episode taught you something new, gave you a new idea, or showcased a new perspective. If you liked the episode, feel free to leave us a review or comment. If you have a recommendation for an individual or an organization who would make a great guest, you can message us on Twitter or Instagram, or send us an email at assemblinginclusion@gmail.com. See you next time.